Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Finance and Administrative Committee for Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. Krista, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Thank you, Krista. Please call the roll.
Certainly. Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Harkins,
Here.
Mr. Lennox,
Here.
Mr. Stanford,
Here.
and today I see we have Mr. Ames on the line.
Thank you, Krista. Committee, before you is the agenda. Are there any recommended changes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. We have the meeting minutes from October 19th, 2021. Are there any changes, additions, or deletions?
Move for approval.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Harkins. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Krista, do we have an appearance or comments from any citizens?
Yes, sir, we do. Today we have one citizen on the line to speak, and that is Mr. Hoagland.
Please proceed.
Mr. Hoagland, go ahead, sir.
Okay, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Afternoon, Mr. Lennox. I sent you and authorities an email investigation on your conflict and corruption. I just received my tax accounting from the town of Hilton Head, sent by Bill Miles to me and South Carolina Turk, who also requested this full accounting on how and where millions of tax funds are spent by Bill Miles. This accounting, hired internal audit is incomplete. It's fraudulent and is not an independent audit and only shows the numbers Bill Miles wants us all to see. His secret sauce on millions of tax funds must end and continues. The recent DMO contract developed by lawyers Finger and Coltrane is also corrupt, fraudulent, not valid, schemed to eliminate any accounting provisions and assisted by town fraudsters, Councilman Lennox Ames, as we all know. This entire tax committee, individually or their companies they work for, are all chamber members, sit on the chamber board committees tied to Bill Miles and business, and keep recommending illegal funding and usage for Bill Miles and other nonprofits like the Low Country Golf Owners Association, the Boys and Girls Club, et cetera, with zero accounting. They are all in conflict, committing fraud, and never seen the accounting on how Bill Miles launders millions to pay his $500,000, $600,000 salary pay package, world travel to China, $2 million home in Indigo Run, $500,000 cashier's mountain home, etc. They are also allowing, by recommending this funding, violations to many state and federal laws by Bill Miles and his illegally operated chamber tax-funded for-profit tax scam. You are liable for scheming and knowingly approving and recommending this illegal use of millions of tax money and violating your fiduciary duties. I again sent a long email to all of you, state authorities and law enforcement, on your lies, corruption, and severe conflicts tied to this chamber. I am sure you will be contacted to tell your side of the story, Mr. Lennox. Be forewarned, lying and perjury to state officials is also a crime, and all your emails can be subpoenaed. Several questions you will need to answer to authorities by the ATAX members particularly. Who called you to ask you to serve on ATAX committee? Under what criteria do you recommend ATAX funding to Bill Miles? You ever seen Bill Miles accounting? Why do you recommend funding if you know it's not illegally used and issued? Would you invest your own money with anyone, including me, with no accounting? Why do you recommend funding of nonprofits that don't qualify under ATAX laws? Banker Lennox, if you disagree, please explain what makes all this legal and right. And you don't have to explain to me, but you're going to have to explain to the authorities when they call you, and I hope you understand that. And I look forward to that day. So far, Mr. Lennox, I've been right on just about everything that you and I have disagreed on. You've lost and I've been right. And I look forward to addressing you at 3 o'clock exactly with that specifically. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Mr.
Y'all have a
Hoagland.
great day.
Thank you. Sir, that concludes appearance by citizens.
Thank you, Krista. Under new business, we have 3 agenda items. The first 2 are for information purposes, and the third is requiring action on behalf of this committee. So let me start with the first. John Troyer, would you give your presentation on the TIF annual report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly will. Allow me a moment to share my screen.
John, do you want questions as you present, or would you prefer that we hold them until the end?
I'm fine to stop me anytime, and that would be great. I don't like how that is. Let me start that again. Okay. I hope you can see. Now I need to acknowledge I worked on this presentation with my counterpart at the Beaufort County Schools, Tanya Crosby, and so this is something we did for a presentation of our Beaufort County Schools, who is a very important partner in this tax increment financing project. So our school board is certainly interested in some of the same information. TIFs are a funding method of allocating taxes so you can move projects forward, hopefully to stimulate private investment and also to improve the tax roll too, as a matter of fact. And so some of the outcomes we hoped for out of this TIF: parks, pedestrian friendly roads, and some other projects. And so the TIF was a mechanism in order to achieve some public goods projects, as well as improve and increase the tax roll. So to spark private development. And so how does the TIF work? Once the TIF is created, you've got a baseline value of all your assessed values collectively. And then each year, as the assessment goes, the increment or the increase is what's contributed by the partners. The tax on the increase is contributed by the partners to the TIF district, and the TIF district performs a certain amount of projects on behalf of all the partners. And so the district itself is a mechanism for all the partners to work together. And so it's a way to pool our money, it's a way to share costs, and it's a way that everybody participates and everybody wins as well. How does it work? This is just how you apply the millage. The millage is on the base rate, and that each jurisdiction keeps the millage on the base rate. And then for the increases, as property values go up, thanks to our public investments and also thanks to spurring private investments, property values also go up. And so that those increases are then contributed to the tax increment district. Here's just another way to look at this. And you can see the TIF is created here on the timeline. You have a baseline property value. This is what each jurisdiction keep. And then as the property values increase, that tax increment is contributed to the TIF. And now this is just for a certain amount of time. And each TIF has a begin date and an end date. And so once the TIF is over and these contributions are made, each jurisdiction forever and ever after that is the beneficiary of those increases in assessed values. And so when we have some overlapping jurisdictions, like Beaufort County, town of Hilton Head, all of the town of Hilton Head is in Beaufort County, so increases in the town of Hilton Head benefit Beaufort County. And also that goes along with the school system too, to varying degrees depending on the classification of the properties. And so we are in this TIF district lifeline within the yellow area, performing projects with the incremental value. And one day when the TIF is over, and that's not too far ahead, all of those increases will go toward each jurisdiction's tax collections. There's just a little bit, county treasurers are involved, county auditors involved to help make sure it's each correct. County finance is involved. And so, and they make reports on TIF collections back to all jurisdictions. And so there's a lot of accountability and a lot of participants in making sure that the numbers balance. So the Beaufort County School District has two different TIFs open right now, Port Royal TIF, and here the one that we'll talk about is the Hilton Head Island TIF 2, which is really the extension. And so to talk a little bit about the Hilton Head TIF, the first TIF began in 1999 for 15 years. The expectation was $65 million in collections, $65 million in projects, and that expired in 2014. As that first TIF was ending and a number of projects were completed, the partners agreed with slightly different terms for a TIF 2 extension, and that was approved by all the different jurisdictions. So it had to be approved by town council, it had to be approved by a county council, it had to be approved by the school board, the public service district #1. And so everybody had to agree to this, and it was approved for 10 more years. And so the first TIF at 15 was $65 million, second TIF an extension for 10 years for $50 million. And so school district changed the level of their participation, and they also provided a cap. And so a couple of things that were anticipated beyond parks, pathways, and roads. A big piece here is USCB, the Children's Museum, and we'll see some more of that later. But that's what was agreed to back in 2014. And so all of the jurisdictions saw the benefit of these projects. All the jurisdictions made a contribution of future tax increases, not in the rate, but the assessed value toward these projects. So they're not losing anything that they have, but they are investing part of their increases. And so that's how the TIF is working. Here's our entities we talked about. From the school system, and this is from the school district, but it's their participation. TIF 1, the first 15 years, $32 million in contribution from that increment. And that was their investing portion, and you can see since 2016 to 2021, the amount of the increment for the Beaufort County School District. And you can see each year it went up. And so that's what you're hoping for, is that those assessed values are growing. And so the tax increment grows. And so public investment is working to help increase the value of the private investments. And so collectively in the district, property values are certainly up over the course of time. Another way to look at this, and I think this is one of my favorite ways to look at this, is that you can see on the left is our partners, Beaufort County Schools, PSD, and the town, are all contributing that increase. For the first 15-year agreement, TIF 1, the county contributed $20 million, schools 32, PSD 785,000, and the town 8.4 million, for a total of $62 million. There was a hope or an expectation that there would be 65 million in collections. There was 62. But that's a lot of public investment to be able to enact a lot of projects. And so on the TIF 2, the extension that started with the 2015 and forward. So it's we are 6 years in, 4 years to go on the 10-year extension. You can see the numbers, 27.9 million out of an expected 50 million in this TIF 2. And so for both of those two TIF agreements, we've got $90 million in contributions from the jurisdictions toward projects. And, that all goes toward advancing private investment in the jurisdictions as well. So what do we get for that? $6 million of pathways, $30 million of roadway improvements, $11 million of land acquisition. There's a number of different signs you see around the island. This land was reserved. Some of it was from referendum purchases, but some of this was from TIF district investments as well. So we've done $5 million in parks improvements, facility improvements, $39 million. The largest of the facilities improvements was the USCB, and then following right behind that on facilities was the TIF was a great contributor toward the Low Country Celebration Park. And so because we have these partners, some of those great community assets were available or possible because everybody worked together, and you can see the benefit of those investments now. And so beyond project administration, consulting, $95 million worth of projects over the course of the first 15 years, and that's 6 years into the 20, right? 6 years into the 10, and so that's 21 years of the 25, and so there will be more. How do we look? Let's go back just a little bit on the it's titled project expenditures, but this is more about operations. TIF 1, $62 million in tax increment collections. There were $30 million worth of financings and interest earnings for a total of $92 million in collections. Projects, $54 million interest. We did 2 different bond issues on TIF 1. And so we pay the interest costs and the financing costs out of the TIF project itself, and $30 million. So all the TIF 1 bonds are all paid off. And so of the $92 million in sources of revenue, $89 million was spent amongst all those different purposes, and had $3 million left at the end of TIF 1. All of this money rolls into TIF 2, and it's available for the TIF 2 projects. And so we've got TIF revenues of $28 million. We did do 1 bond issue, it was $28.5, was the interest earnings. To make a total available of $57 million. Projects and obviously the USCB and the Low Country Celebration Park were the biggest ones so far on TIF 2. Paid interest, paid principal, and so we issued $28 million, was paid off $13 million, so we have roughly $15 million in bonds yet to pay off. And we've got 4 more years of collections, and so funds used $57 million, so $57 million 6 collected, $57 million 7, or $57 million 2 used, and so it's almost a break even on TIF 2 so far. And for the grand total, $150 million available, 146 used, and almost $4 million yet to be deployed for improvements.
John, I've got a question for you, if I could, while you're on that slide.
Yep.
Let me see, as projects are developed, do the partners have to agree on the projects, or they just have to fit into categories and the town makes the decision?
Well, the projects were agreed to at the start of the TIF in the agreements in a broad sense. And so what we're trying to fulfill with these projects is in the spirit of the agreements that were done, the first 2 agreements. And so there were a number of projects that were spelled out as they would like to be able to do these pending collections. And so between USCB and the Low Country Celebration Park, some road improvements, pathways, these projects were executed.
So they were decided in advance and projected in advance, and then the town didn't have to go back to the individual partners to seek approval on implementing those funds for those projects.
And it's through the normal capital improvements plan. And so what you'll see here is, and what you'll see in the future is there's still going to be some TIF monies available, and that will be presented as part of the budget process for approved plans, approved projects in the spirit of those TIF agreements.
Okay, thank you.
So what do we do from here? And so I'll go back just one page. And so $150 million available, $146 million has been spent, $4 million at this moment. We've got 4 more years to go. What do we do from here? We project our future TIF collections. And so we want to be real careful. We don't want to be under collected. We don't want to do projects that are beyond what the TIF provides, but then we don't want to, if we want to fully utilize and do every single project that we can to fit into those. This was our agreement with the partners that we would do as much as we could in the TIF. And so we don't want to be high, we don't want to be low. We are going to work very, very hard to finish out the TIF for the next 4 years and make that right on the money. We look to the, and to Glenn's question, second one, we look to the original and extension project lists as we start to develop our CIP for next year. Fit in what we can fit in financially, how that will work, and we manage our spending as we finish out the last 4 years of this TIF extension. We make our TIF bond and continue that each year. And so as the TIF expires, your bonds are paid off and it coincides with the same time. So that's 2025 is the last year. And you've got a more detailed handout. And so certainly I'm available offline and you can kind of see some of the details that go with that. And I will open this up for questions.
Thank you, John. Good report. Committee, what are your questions or comments of John? John, calendar year 2024 is the last year, or is it 2025?
Yeah, I've got it in my notes as to fiscal year 2025. So
it's fiscal. Okay.
And so I think the agreements are probably tax year 24, fiscal year 25.
And that means that something over just over $5 million will be gone or unavailable for future CIP projects.
Yes. Yes. Now, the flip side of that is it's about $1 million a year of our increment. And so the TIF collections won't be there, but every jurisdiction gets back their part. And so that'd be about $1 million. So it's -5 + 1.
Okay, so the net is a -4. Is the current TIF balance of just over $3 million already committed in the fiscal year 2022 CIP?
Some of it is, yes. And so, yeah, we've got some of that in there. Our expectation, and that's part of the report, is our expectation is that we'll should be able to appropriate another $4 million in the future. So that's our expectation over the course of the next 4 years.
A portion of that balance and the to be collected funds will have to go toward payment of any outstanding balance on the bonds.
And yeah, it's about $15 million outstanding on the bonds. And yeah, of course, that's paid first.
And we therefore have about 2.5 years worth of collections up to fiscal year 2025.
Mhm. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the TIF, those collections really map up because their property taxes match up with our property tax collections. And so very seasonal, just like our property tax collections.
And John, what is the likelihood of using this vehicle in the future?
It's a great vehicle, but I think there would certainly each jurisdictions. I think back when these agreements were made, there was a different environment for the different jurisdictions, and you know, particularly you look at the schools, and they've got huge building projects going on for themselves, and for them to commit money to TIF district when they've got building needs that are imminent right now would be an uphill battle.
So therefore, for planning purposes, as it pertains to capital projects, we're going to have to look for another source.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think for the right project, it's a great vehicle, but it'd have to be a really special project, I think, to get all the jurisdictions to agree.
Bill.
Yes, thank you, Tom. There's no question this is a great program, and I'm just wondering, would the airport lend itself as a TIF project potential, recognizing that it's owned by the county, it inures to the benefit of the county and ourselves? I guess one is that possible? And two, do you think that could generate support?
Yeah, and I think you'd have to put some thought into the boundaries, how to draw the lines of the district, and so that would take some real thought, and then they'd have to be more thoughtful about what kind of improvements would they make that all the jurisdictions participants would want to get on board and participate in. And so, yes, that is possible.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions for John? John, thank you. This annual report that you sent us is very meaningful. And I think that the fact that you were able to leverage the TIF collections into over $58 million in bond revenue allowed us to do these projects well in advance of the original TIF term maturing and the 10-year extension.
Right, yeah, I think that's an excellent point, is that what they allowed us to do is to do the projects USCB. If we had to wait for the collections, we'd still be probably working on it.
Good report, and it worked exactly the way we wanted it to. John, agenda item 2 is also yours. As you all know, we have been following the town finances on a monthly basis to see what each month and year to date is like, but more importantly, to try to identify any trends that may impact us either favorably or unfavorably. And John, I think based on what you sent out, the current trend continues.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it does. Allow me to share my screen. Okay, for our monthly report for the 4 months ending October 31st. It's got a little different look. I hope you like it. Key issues: the town will continue to monitor revenues. We're not done with that. We're never done with that. We continue to control expenditures, keep an eye on it, monitoring those and making sure that our revenues and expenditures are going together. And so adjust where necessary. And so my report, so far so good. These measures are working. And I'd also say so far, not so far, but to stand here today on November the 16th, and with these numbers, I would have certainly taken that 4 months ago when we started the year. So yes, we will be happy with those results. Again, I always like to say that the town continues to benefit from town council's action, build reserves, diversify revenue streams. Those certainly help us manage through Hurricane Matthew, and they also help us manage through this pandemic. And so special thank you to town council. Couple of comments from last month. Let's get an update on business licenses. It's in there. Let's get an update on stormwater revenues. It's in there, and permits. And so we'll see that coming up. General fund revenues. We had an up August and a down September. You can see an up August, down September. So each month, I think this is kind of indicative that beyond seasonality, there's just a certain randomness each month, but over time, trends start to develop. You can look and see, okay, August up, September down, October much more like normal. And you'll notice that October is above the previous Octobers. So, putting the this is just a look from the first 4 months or actuals, and it tends to go. So, and also I think this also shows just, okay, every month is important, but you can see our most important ones are coming out. Year to date, it's a very consistent pattern. The brown being 2022 is better than the previous 3 years every single month. And yeah, 2021 was a good year, and 2022 is even better. So I'm happy with that. So we continue to lead the last 3 years. Still have a long ways to go, but it's a great start to the year. Property taxes, this is early in the year, but you can see that the first 4 months look an awful lot like 4 months from the past 2 years. And it's still really early for property taxes. And so we've just done this part, this large we got to go. The date property taxes kind of tell a more complete story, and you can see even in December, it doesn't climb up that much. It's significantly more than October, November, but the real collections happen in January, February, March. How are we doing so far? We have collected 2% of our property taxes, which is comparable to what we had in past years. So nothing out of the ordinary. If you want to see just property taxes by itself, we're less than 1% less than last year, and I don't have any worries at all about that. I think we'll have our property values are going up. I think we all know that, and our property tax collections won't go up as fast as the values, but they will go up. And so that's coming. This is just our same sample of revenues going back a year ago. As the committee asked me to make a report and tell us how we're doing, these were the ones that I selected to try to give one an early look, and two, just a representative sample to be able to show how are we doing. We started the pandemic, worried about revenue collections. These are the ones that I chose to pick out.
John, why are we down 41% on stormwater?
And stormwater is the same way. It's really early in the year. I think of it as an outlier, and I'm real comfortable, and we'll talk more about stormwater toward the end, but we're going to make it up. And so, not to worry.
Okay, well, hold you to that.
Not to worry. And I look at another negative, real estate transfer fee, but we're only off. Last year was a record year by a lot, and so we're only off 1.5% of a record year on real estate transfer fee. So that's a great indicator of a start. There's still high real estate activity, and so that's another indicator. Hospitality tax 35%, each fee 39%, and so electric franchise fee, that's going to be on electric usage, and a lot of those can be weather related. How much do people have to run their air conditioning? How much do they have to run the heat? And so 6%, keep an eye on it. And then road usage fee, I think the one takeaway here is town council, of course, has voted to pause that pending some further legal outcomes. And so this one, we're not going to see this growing as that pause has happened. I also would point out to you that one of our big collections in October, normal collections out in October, our friends at the state are still working through the collection, balancing, and allocating process. We've had communications with them. It's on the way, but it normally works. We get it before the end of October. We posted in October. Last year was 2.6 million. We haven't received it yet, but we understand that it's on the way, but it's a temporary zero. And so October to October for state aid tax, we're down, but then it'll show up in November collections. And so if you were to make an allowance for state aid tax, then our numbers would be certainly favorable this October versus last October. And so state aid tax is they're working on it. So the other day, let's talk a little bit about this, our actual to October compared to our full fiscal year of last year, 21%. And so that's a good start. And this is about where this is better than what we expected at this point in time. And Glenn, to your question, tax increment financing, we're only 1.2% collected. So there's a long way to go. Stormwater, only 1.3% collected. So there's still a long way to go. And we don't get too worried about variances like now. If you have these kind of variances in March and April, in Europe, we'll keep an eye on revenues and transfers in. This is just the general fund. It does show strict revenues from outside 20% up. And last year, it's a great start. Transfers in are 1.7. We try to keep those steady, and they'll be comparable. And I think that's going to be whatever this percentage turns out to be for our actual revenues coming in on the outside. Transfer much more comparable to this. Expenses 5.3%. I would draw your attention to the net general fund activity. So a year ago at this time, October 31st, 2021, it took a temporary draw of our reserves of $3.6 million. This year, it's only requiring about $3 million. So we're $600,000 better than that at this moment in time for the general fund. So it's a good start.
And John, that is without the hospitality tax being sent from the state.
And so hospitality tax, we collect that in the hospitality tax fund. But yeah, this is, I didn't identify this, and that's my apologies, Mr. Chairman. That this is just the general fund. And so, yeah, a good start to the year. We probably doing the budget, 22% collected, 27% spent. And so we're at October 31st, we're 33% through the year, and our spending is 28.7%. And so we're trending below budget, but know that June is always about a month and a half worth of expenditures. And so we want to always trend a little bit less than what the time elapsed is for each year, but this is right where we need to be in spending. Just a visual, actual collections versus last year's actual one. So it's a good start, but there's a long way to go. Spending. You can kind of see also there's a little bit of a jaggedness to these schedules. Depending, July had our insurance premiums and some initial first of the year expenses that just happened right at the first of the year. August is less, September is more, October is less. And so there's a little bit of a mixed bag each year. But from October, much more like we expected. If we're going to draw a trend line, we're starting to get to, after 4 months into the year, starting to get a good trend and see where our spending is. And so it gives a more consistent picture on our spending. Just this month-to-month differences kind of go away with the trend. Year-to-date spending compared to the previous year, we look very much like the previous 2 years in our spending, 5.3% more. Last year at this time, we were still holding back on spending. And so it was still early enough in the COVID that we were purposefully holding several different things back and not executing. And this year we're executing and doing the projects as laid out in the budget. And so we're trying to do the things that the town is here for.
John, how would that year-to-date spending compare to budget?
It's coming up. And so I think let's just go back a couple. I think we're on 28% of budget. This is general fund only, 12.7 million compared to 44.2. And that's our amended budget. And so it's our budget as of today. And so 28.7% spent, 33% of the way through the year. So this is much more consistent than our revenue numbers are. And so I think that's a piece of why we need this. There's also it's like just basic town operations have much more of a fixed cost element. Our revenues are certainly very, very seasonal. And, that's why reserves are declining. How are we doing on spending? This is another year-to-year comparison. And so look at some of these things and say, well, contact and manager, that's really up. But the reality of it is all the employees, and we look back through and check them, have moderated from last year, and we would expect them to moderate even more as we progress. And so what you'll see are some initial, just different timings for some of these departments. And they're going to lessen out as we go through the year. And so, like, for instance, the townwide includes a transfer to the capital improvements plan that wasn't there last year. It's like part of a 15% increase. Sheriff and beach services. Some of the money a year ago that we were able to save with the sheriff's contract was deployed to make some parks improvement. This year, those parks improvements are in the operating budget capital plan, and so if you compare, it looks like our spending is less, but it's just different, and so that's fully expected. And so all of this is going to moderate and continue to moderate as we proceed. And so I'm very, very comfortable with all of these different plans. And if you want to compare, first was a year-to-year, October to October expense comparison. To Mr. Chairman's question, how we doing for budget? And we try to work and say, well, we want to be about 33% or less, knowing that June is going to be, we make the change from past year career, and so we have to provide for about an extra half a month or so of expenses in June. All of these are well within our expectation. And the town line has our large property insurance and casualty insurance premiums in July, right off the bat. So that makes our numbers high at the start of the year. And so last year, I think this is also a good comparison. At this time, 4 months in, 27.4% of budget to October, and we were still trying to hold back some spending. And this year, it's more going and doing according to the budget plan, and we're executing the budget plan rather than something less than the budget plan, which we did last year. Reserves is just the last 3 years, actuals and reserves within a year, and you can see all the way through February. Certainly, be our reserves, use our reserves until this property taxes come in. This is another good chart. If you look at the brown columns, July, we need to use reserves. August, we deposit some back. September, we use reserves. October, we deposit some back. And so it's up and down and up and down. And it will level out as we go. So, but I think that's a good indicator that we're not too excited about any 1 month, but yeah, you have to look a little more into the details.
John, it appears as if there is volatility month over month. But to your point, over the 12-month fiscal year, the volatility pretty much smooths out.
And so I think a lot of this is based on just a timing differences. And so if you happen to collect revenue on the 30th of the month or the 1st of the month, it can have a big difference year to year here, but year to date, it doesn't mean that much difference. But in individual month, it can make a big difference.
And we're going to see that in property tax collections this year because the tax bills went out on time.
So thankful, yes. We appreciate the work that has happened to make that happen. So temporary use of reserves, our year-to-date numbers. And I think this is one that we like to look at is 2022 is better than the last 3 years. And so you can see blue is 2021, 2020 significantly bigger temporary use of reserves, and it's really doing better. And I like this presentation, but this is just shows 2022 revenues net of expenses. We're doing better in 2022 than each of the last 2 years. So next slide is the same thing, but extended and shows the rest of the year, and it shows just how important our reserves are for November, December, and even in January. We're getting property taxes in, but we're still in the temporary use of reserves, and then not February, and last year was even in March before that turned around. But really good start to this year. This is just a picture of last year, and it shows the green is collections, and red is spending, and it was in March. And then that turn happened, that brings more collections to spending. So hopefully, like Mr. Chairman said, that because the tax bills went out on time this year, that crossover point is going to be earlier. So helpful. Temporary use of reserves, again, we're looking at $600,000 increase every year. We've got some very important months coming up in the next few months, but it's a little discussed. Beach fee collections, Brown is this year, which one's better than last 2 years. So if we make that a line, green is the current year consistently better than last year. Last year was a record year collections. Really good start to beach fee collections. Hospitality, that was hit the worst with the pandemic. You can see the drop as the pandemic hit in 2020 and it rebounded in 2021. That's our tax on prepared food and beverage. And so we're happy that that was a strong comeback in 2021. For the current year, 22, fiscal 22, we're doing even better than 2021 numbers. So we're glad to see that really strong start to the year. And so the green is 2022, and that's better than the last 2 years. And last year was a good year, so we're off to a good start. Stormwater fees, and this is kind of goes back to Mr. Stanford's question. Is that if you look at stormwater collections on an annual basis, it's pretty flat line, and so any 1 month might be up or down a little bit, but if as we get to the end of the year, it looks a whole lot like the year before. And so it's steady, consistent total. And so, yeah, we've got not great start to our stormwater collections this year. I'm not worried, and this is why I'm not worried. If you put spending, and here's just the last 4 years of spend, what I think is interesting about this, and real telling, 2018 was the year after Matthew, and so a lot of projects, there was a lot of need for stormwater projects, and 2018 was a year of assessing, planning, designing projects, bidding projects, and so you see collections are ahead of spending because of the planning, design, and bid, and projects weren't completed. As we move into 19, 20, 21, our stormwater team has really done well to utilize and maximize funds that are available to implement projects. And so I would look at this as a success story, is to go and do stormwater improvements. We're seeing those happen and successfully executed. Permits. And look at the last 30 years of action. Just notice how significantly more 2021 was than 2020 or even 2019, which are good years on their own. And so, really strong year on permits.
I'm good, thank you. I'm on a Zoom call.
For this year, all our permits we are 30.9% compared to last year. So we're comparing ourselves to a record year. 33% of the year and 30.9% of last year. So a little bit behind last year's numbers, but last year's numbers were a record year. So we think it's a great start. And so we'll keep monitoring this as we go. But to start, there's a question last time about business licenses and implementation of the model ordinance that council has studied diligently this past summer and fall. And so with council took action to implement the model ordinance that put our business license off to work. They had a summer of informational meetings with key stakeholders, leading appearances, public questionnaires, public meetings. And so we also, within the office, that customers may not necessarily know, we update software, we update forms, we have meetings with the property managers, meetings with the HOAs, and we've updated our procedures informally for us to be ready to do this part of the ordinance. Okay, what are we going to do? Yes, so there's going to be no ordinance, so we have to modify what we do in order to match the model ordinance. But I'm happy to report, and thanks for the question. We are ready to go live on January 1. We already have over 600 new businesses signed up for the new year already. And so, and there's more coming in every day. So I'm excited to report all of this, and it's been a hub of activity. And thank you to everyone in our revenue services who have been all hands on deck in order to successfully implement this.
John, on the license, the business license fees, I think I asked you about this last month as well. It's clear to me that your office is fully up and ready to go with this. But I am concerned about some of the businesses that have not been licensed, in particular, single owner rental properties. I would like to see a report maybe next month on what your plan is for reaching out and contacting them, and what your success, if any, has been, and what the issues have been, so that we're prepared for some public outrage, I suspect, as we move into this. So I would appreciate a report on that. Clearly, the town is ready, but I want to make sure that the taxpayers are ready as well.
Yes,
Thank
you for the question. It's an education process, so it's a change. We have a lot of owners who are live full-time somewhere else, and to get the word out to absentee owners, or maybe owners who are only here part of the time, is certainly a challenge. And so I'm happy to make a report. We have done a number of outreaches. We've been successful working with the HOAs and property managers to work with them, so that we're trying to get as many as we can. It is a learning process. Oh, it's new. I never had to have a business license before. Yeah, that's not always warmly received, but it is an education process, and we'll update that next month. So thank you for the question.
John, it's David Ames. Your microphone seems to be garbled for my reception. I'm having some difficulty hearing what you're saying sometimes. I don't know if there's a different microphone you can use or not.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just making an adjustment, and hopefully is that any better at all? Or
It is for me. Thank you very much.
okay,
I would like to add to that, when Tom Lennox speaks, it's crystal clear. And I thought it was my machine here, but thanks for sharing that, David.
okay. Yes, thank you very much. Comments or questions? And so one of the things that is always helpful, it certainly helps me. One, anything that you want to talk about here on this presentation, and two, certainly open for Councilman Stanford, anything you'd like to talk about next time, and we can certainly entertain those things too.
Is Tom back on? Oh, good.
Yes, I am. What are your questions?
I will follow the committee.
If I might, Tom, one of the things, I tend to be a broad brush finance guy, and I know that our finance director has to get into the weeds, and I appreciate him trying to clarify those weeds as much as possible. But to me, listening to this report and reviewing the information, the back of a cocktail napkin summary on this would be that our revenues are consistently up while our expenditures are slightly below budget. Very positive report. That's what I see. Thank you.
I think that's a good summary. Yes.
It
I have a
is, and I think that it is very accurate too. Alex?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Troyer, thank you for not only stepping us through the presentation, but providing it beforehand so we can have some time to go through it. Thank you very much. I can appreciate you having a sampling of line items to compare to last year and stay consistent in that comparison. I'm just curious to know, is there a threshold in your mind as to particular line items that are not in your sampling, that if they fall beneath that you would pay certain attention to?
Oh, I pay attention to all of them.
Sure.
And-
Well, special attention.
So, and this is just, I answered the question last year from Finance Committee to be able to provide a report to answer the question, how are we doing? And that was my selection from last year. I'm just trying to be consistent, and I can certainly add to it and supplement. And I certainly agree with your question, is that that's only, a snippet, and we need a more full picture. But I just wanted to have at least a consistent look
And
every
I think-
single month.
I think you have, John, but let me state Alex's question perhaps in a different way. I don't think we need to get down to the detailed general ledger. But Alex's question said a different way. Would you identify any unfavorable trends that you see either in the revenue or the expense side?
Yes, I would. I haven't seen any that really concern me, but I think, let me just pay special attention to that, and I'll make a report. I'll go back through the details and say, okay, let's take a special look for that.
Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Tom. And I think my comment is directed more to the Finance Committee than John Troyer. If we see revenues continuing at a pace greater than budget and of expenses basically holding budget, at what point does the Finance Administrative Committee recommend the use of that delta, or that surplus? Is there a strategy, or do we simply put it in reserve and wait until next year?
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but what has been happening, David, and your question is a real good one. What has been happening over the past fiscal years is we've had a surplus at the conclusion of each year. Even in the pandemic year, I think we had approximately $1 million surplus. That has been going to the reserve balances, and the reserve totals have been growing over the past 4 or 5 years. The operative question is, and I think it should reside in this committee, at what level do we think our reserve balances are sufficient to protect us against any unforeseen event, i.e. hurricanes and pandemics? And that could be the topic, David, for a number of Finance Committee meetings, and we would ask that John and the town manager be involved in that discussion as well, because I have had citizens come to me and tell me that it's not our role as a town to be collecting taxes and fees and building reserves. Our role as a town is to provide the adequate level of services and facilities. And at what point do we have enough reserves and take that delta, to use your term, and turn that into projects, facilities, and services?
Yes, that's sort of the second part of my question. Is there any reason to accelerate investment? But I agree with your approach. Let's have the F&A committee be thinking about this and recommend something to council.
John, let's more fully develop this conversation.
Right. I think I'll try to frame some discussion with our next month's report. We are just finishing up with our, pardon me, we're
And-
just finishing up with our auditors. And so I'll present some more information as kind of a framework to help start a discussion next month.
And as we actually have multiple reserve accounts,
Mhm.
and that total you can see on your monthly financial statement that John's office sends out to us. But the aggregate total, John, of all the reserve accounts is over $100 million. And they are broken down for specific uses and specific purposes. So as you bring that forward next month, John, why don't you use that monthly report that you send us really as the baseline in the discussion? I can recall the first time I saw the reserve totals, I was pleasantly surprised.
Sure. And I think too, it goes to Alex's point too, is how can we get a more complete picture? And I think what you're describing, Mr. Chairman, is a more complete picture, and I think that will be a healthy discussion.
Okay. What other questions or comments do council members have for John on the October 30th, 2021 financials? Bill?
Yes, going back to the reserve discussion, John, if you could remind us in your work to be done on the subject, what we have set forth as guidance to ourselves and in turn have shared it with the rating agencies. Because I believe we have more or less pledged a certain level of security for them with the reserve account.
Yes,
So-
they do, and we'll make that part of the report. Our general fund, it's a policy, and it's just been a couple of years where town council raised the policy reserve level for the general fund from 25 to 30% to 35 to 40%. And we'll go through that math next
Okay,
month.
thank you.
Good. That's going to be a good meeting.
Mhm.
Thank you, John, for the October 30th report. The favorable trend continues. That's my contractor from outside. He's coming and going. Thank you.
Rapping on the window.
Rapping on my window. Give me
Yeah.
the high sign from outside.
He's asking-
Okay.
He's asking when you're gonna pay him.
Yeah, the check's in the mail. Okay, that concludes the first two new business agenda items. No action required. They both were information purposes only. The third is an item that will require our action to either recommend that it be sent to full council for approval or not. And it is a consideration of a recommendation authorizing the town manager to enter into a contract to secure fire rescue fleet updates. As you recall, about 7 months ago, as a part of the fiscal year 2022 budget, we approved the acquisition of a little over $6 million in fire rescue equipment via a lease. Brad is prepared to go to the market and contract, and there have been some changes since he originally priced it out. And we have Brad Tadlock and Chief Blankenship here to give us a presentation or update us on what has happened. Chief Tadlock.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, unfortunately, I'm a little disappointed to be here today because the overall bid for the equipment is higher than what we allocated in the budget. We went out to bid this summer. We came back early fall. We started going through the bid specifications, and even through negotiation, us trying to cut some items out, we are still $1.2 million over what we allocated. So what I'd done in the past was looked at what we knew fire trucks were selling for typically in a fleet replacement like this, and added 5% inflation fee. But obviously with COVID, that was not enough. So that's where we're at this point. The vendor that was selected based on the specifications has said if we do not enter into an agreement by December 1st, that the cost will go up 4%. We had some discussions about rebidding the entire package, but the procurement manager and John Troyer there both indicated the vendor said the price increase after January 1 would most likely be 10 to 15% higher, which would add another almost probably close to $1 million onto this purchase. So that's kind of a brief summary of where we're at. I know I would give you a little background that the fleet replacement plan came out of a master plan study in 1998 after the two departments merged. And town council in 2005 approved an entire fleet replacement, and that was executed in 2007 with the trucks arriving in 2008, which are the trucks we have now. So they'll be approaching 14 years old by next year, the fall of next year. And typically there's a lag time of 10 to 11 months once the order is placed to obtain the fire truck. So that's why I say, well, our trucks will be approaching 14 years old. The original plan was to replace the fleet in 2017-18, but of course we had Hurricane Matthew, and at the time I talked to Steve and we decided to push the trucks forward, obviously not knowing a pandemic was coming. And we went ahead and repurposed the ambulance fleet because of the workload on our EMS vehicles. We decided to extend the life of the pumpers, that we could get 14 or 15 years out of them. They were in fairly good shape at that time. You know, they were 10 years old, which is typically your best trade-in value is at 10. After that, it starts to go down. And so we executed the ambulances and then went forward with the pumpers this year. So part of the standardization process is that it saves on long-term costs. That what we've realized in this fleet that there's a lot of savings, tangible savings you can see related to operations, efficiency, safety. You're dealing with the same type of vehicle for all the crews. So there's a lot of time efficiencies and training and how we operate. There's better coordination on the fire ground because of consistency in what we do, things like that. The fleet maintenance shop, which obviously has the responsibility to maintain the fleet, you have a lot of efficiencies there because you're buying the same parts. You're dealing with one vendor. The mechanics, as they're trained on these trucks and work on the trucks, they obviously see trends and are able to more quickly identify problems that may come up in the future based on what we're seeing in the fleet. So there's a lot of advantages. Safety for the operators as they drive. Trucks are consistent related to their weight, their size. The trucks we spec are very similar to what we have now. We kept them the wheelbase the same, the length the same, and the height the same within inches because they fit our community, the road network, the tree limbs. So these are what I would say are kind of middle of the road pumpers. They're not on the high end that you can see out there, but they are special for our unique situation as opposed to buying a fire truck off the shelf like a lot of rural areas may do. So I think, Mr. Lennox, did you have any?
No, I think you've addressed the benefit of buying the entire fleet at the same time versus staging them or phasing over a year or two. Chief, was there the same inflationary impact on your trade-ins that there was on the new equipment? Was the net what you expected it to be?
It was a little lower than I had expected based on our fleet. There's a couple things that can contribute to that. It was consistent to what we got 10 years ago or 15 years ago back in 08. but it was for the condition of our fleet. I thought we might get a little more for it, but our pumpers are designed for a city based on the wheel, the chassis and the height. So oftentimes the used truck market is rural areas where volunteer departments and the like buy good used equipment to keep their service up. And they carry 1,000 gallons of water. We only carry 500 because we have a great hydrant system here. And there's a lot of weight in 500 gallons of water that over time can be hard on a truck through the life of like 10 to 15 years. So I think that could hurt a little bit of the trade-in value. There's just a more of an open market for certain trucks for the volunteer side of the fire service.
Okay, thank you, Chief. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask John Troyer to make a comment on how he plans on financing this and what impact on the current fiscal 22 budget this will have.
Well, sure. And we had originally planned on a lease. The lease helps because it's going to match with the lifespan of the trucks. And so the people who are enjoying the use of the trucks or have those trucks available for them help to pay for that. And so our initial thought was we were going to go 10 years, a 10-year lease to match that. We may have to go 12, but either way that we're going to bid the lease. And so it's a separate financial transaction, and whoever will get us the lowest interest rate will get the money. And that's just a math question at the time of the purchase. And that'll be at the time the trucks are delivered. The trucks are not scheduled to be delivered for some time. This is all, there's a long lead time to make these trucks. And so our lease proceeds won't be due until at best at the end of this fiscal year and probably into the first of next fiscal year. And so we'll build into lease payments at earliest 2023, fiscal 2023, and probably 2024. And so we end up just paying for this over time.
Okay. And Chief, is your vendor negotiating with you in good faith, in your opinion?
He has been. John and the procurement officer handle most of the negotiations through them, so that you know that we're on the sidelines based on we spec the truck, and the vendor and John Rich do the negotiations. But I think they've been fair, and you know I've talked to other chiefs around and tried to figure out what they're seeing, and everyone is seeing the same thing.
Okay. Council members, what questions or comments do you have of either Chief Tadlock or John Troyer? Glenn.
Thank you. Chief John, thank you for this report. First, I've got to say that using a lease for this type of transaction for a depreciating asset makes wonderful sense to me. I'm really glad that we're looking at doing that. You quoted a price of, I think, an increase of something like $1.2 million. John, give us some idea what that's going to do to the lease cost. I know you don't have a bid on it yet, but it's not going to cost us $1.2 million a year. That is, that increase is not going to cost us that much.
And just a couple of sample numbers at a 3.5% increase or 3.5% interest, which we can do better. The payments would be $745,000 over 10 years. And if we did it over 12 years at the higher number, the payments would be $772,000 a year.
Okay, and how much of that ballpark, how much of that is attributable to the increase in cost of the equipment itself, the $1.2 million?
Yeah, $26,000 a year on an additional.
That's a pretty easy one for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Glenn. Alex.
Yes, thank you. Chief, you mentioned that we got a new set of ambulances, I guess, in 2008. I think you said, was it that long ago?
No, 2019.
2019. Okay, and the lifespan on those, give or take?
10 years, 10 to 12, depending on, the wear and tear.
So we'll be well within potentially paying off the question at hand before we have to make another decision, right? Based on that lifeline, correct?
On the ambulances?
The fire fleet that's in question today,
Yeah.
if we go 10 to 12 years, we'll be well within paying that off before we have to answer another question of the ambulances, correct?
Yeah,
That's
we'd
what-
be right. We'd be right at that point. And our ambulances, the type we buy, they are manufactured with a generator, and we can actually lift the box off and put a new chassis under it. So you get a new motor and new chassis, and they repurpose the box typically a little bit to improve the flooring and things that wear and tear. So we can actually maybe push those ambulances out to 15 years with a new chassis, or even longer. It'll just depend on the wear and tear we see and how well they hold up.
Got it. Okay. I'm good, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Bill?
Yes, more a comment than a question, and maybe it's not analogous to this situation, but I think we all hear every day that the used car market has gone up in value, in pricing, for a lot of the same reasons. I thought we might experience the same thing with our used vehicles, but unfortunately that's not the case. So I am totally supportive of the direction we're heading toward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Chief and John, then it is your recommendation that we recommend this increase to the full town council this afternoon.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, that would be our recommendation.
Is there a motion to support that recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we endorse the direction set forth today to us from the chief, and we recommend the action he's requesting to our colleagues in town council.
Thank you, Bill.
I will
Is
second that, but I would like to make an amendment to that, a slight amendment if I could, or just a clarification. It would help the full council, John, to see the breakdown in the lease cost as we talked about it in terms of ballpark numbers. Rather than talking about an additional $1 million, we're talking about an additional approximately $26,000. That makes a big difference.
Thank you for that. And I've got some numbers, and so I can email those out to everybody and make sure everybody has it.
Excellent, thank you. So I do second that motion.
And Bill, for clarification, and Glenn for clarification, that $26,000 a year is increased each and every year, and the lease term is increased from 10 to 12 years as well. Is there any further discussion? Krista, are you clear in the motion? Thank you. Any further discussion? If there is none, Krista, please call the roll. Krista, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes,
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alex and David, for participating in this committee meeting. David, comment.
Yes, thank you. Just for consideration for all council members, when a committee takes action an hour before a town council meeting, in theory, the public doesn't have an opportunity to consider the situation and the vote. I just wonder whether or not council should I'm not suggesting this today, but I think it's something we need to think about. Having a policy or a procedure where a committee council vote can't take place on the day of a council meeting or 1 week after, or some standard.
David, that's a point that we have discussed in the past, and I think it is the right question in every instance to ask. I asked this when John came to me about putting it on the agenda the day of council, and we wouldn't do this other than the trigger that Chief Tadlock has with December 1st. And so I can say without exception that this committee will not move on any agenda items that are to be presented an hour later to council.
Thank you. And I think that's a good policy.
For the record,
Any-
it's 30 minutes.
Oh, you're right. You're right, Glenn. Any other business to come before this committee? Thank you all.
Move for
Talk to you.
adjournment.
We stand adjourned.
Thank you all.